How often do we receive warnings about upcoming events, but, alas, we do not always notice them. I am convinced that at such moments, some forces intervene in our destiny in order to change our lives or even save them. Someone, hearing these words, will say, "I do not believe in this. All this is nonsense." Then why, when your plans collapse, do you sometimes exclaim, "I knew that this would happen"? Why did not you pay attention to your feelings in advance and notice the onset of trouble? Paco Rabanne increasingly asked himself this question at the end of his life. Many know him as a fashion designer and the founder of his own fashion house. However, this is not what interested Paco Rabanne most. At the end of his life, he admitted that he could see some events of the future. Paco Rabanne wrote about this in his books. In them, he claimed that every person has the ability to foresee the future to a greater or lesser extent. In his latest book, Rabanne explained how to use this ability. In January of 1939, my mother, Maria Luisa, tried to take me, my brother, and my 2 sisters out of Spain. The war had been going on for 3 years here, and I have the most terrible memories of it. That day, we were supposed to board a ship sailing to Mexico. My mother called this opportunity the last chance for our salvation. Paco Rabanne told about this, perhaps, the most fateful event in his life. At that time, the future fashion designer was only 5 years old. He was walking to the pier with his mother, holding her hand. Her older brother Paco was holding her other hand. Her grandmother and 2 granddaughters were barely keeping up with them. Maria Luisa kept hurrying them along. She understood that if she did not leave Spain today, she would be arrested, and her children would be sent to an orphanage. The day before, Paco's father, who was soon to meet his death, was arrested. Maria Luisa was constantly aware of the mortal danger that hung over her and, perhaps, over her children. But when she and everyone else boarded the ship, which was about to set off on its journey, the woman let out such a scream that one might have thought she had gone mad. Paco's mother begged them to lower the gangway and let her and her children off the ship. At that moment, I did not recognize my mother. This woman, who was always calm and balanced, had an unprecedented attack of madness. Never before and never after had I seen her in such a state. My grandmother called her crazy and tried to persuade her to stay on the ship. The old woman painted a terrible future for her daughter if she did not follow this advice. But it was all in vain. Paco Rabanne recalled the events of that day. The distraught woman and her children were let off the ship. Now they stood on the pier and watched their last hope. Grandma Paco continued to argue with her daughter, who, by staying behind, had condemned herself to death. But suddenly the old woman had to shut up. She opened her mouth in surprise when, before her eyes, the ship that had just sailed became the target of a German squadron. For a few moments, the amazed people on the pier watched as the vessel slowly sank into the water. Maria Luisa was the first to come to her senses. She grabbed the children by the hands, leading them away from the pier. She did not know where to run now and where to look for salvation. On the way, the woman was stopped by a shopkeeper who was transporting vegetables in his truck. He called out to Maria Luisa and promised to take her and the children out of the city. The shopkeeper hid them between sacks of vegetables. So they were able to leave the city. Then they reached Barcelona and crossed the Pyrenees. Finally, Maria Luisa and her children reached France. Here they were safe. Is there a person who, summing up some bitter event, has not said the following phrase, "I felt it"? In such situations, we say that we had a premonition of something, and this something happened. Perhaps, every person can tell a similar story from their life. An actress I know shared this story with me, said Paco Rabanne. The actress he was talking about was playing the role of a grumpy nanny in a play at the time. After the performance, the woman went home on foot. The journey took about half an hour. She had walked along this night pavement hundreds of times before, and never before had she been overcome by any unpleasant premonitions. But this time, the actress, sitting in her dressing room, felt an inexplicable fear. She remembered all the events of the past day and did not find anything in it that could cause this feeling. The woman calmed herself and convinced herself that she had no reason to be afraid. One of her colleagues offered to walk her home, but she refused. After removing her makeup, the actress put on her coat and left the theater. A few minutes later, the same fear took hold of her. She quickened her pace and reached a familiar cafe. Under the light of its sign, the woman felt safe. She stopped to catch her breath. A few moments later, standing near the cafe, the woman felt someone grab her by the shoulder. Then came a strong blow. When she came to, she found herself lying on the road without a bag and jewelry. Listening to this story, Paco Rabanne wondered if this situation could have happened if the actress had listened to her intuition and allowed herself to be walked home. Paco Rabanne admitted that he always listened to his premonitions. He said, "It has saved me more than once." One day, the fashion designer was returning home from an event. It was already dark outside, but he was not the kind of person who was afraid of his own shadow. He was calmly walking down the street, and at that moment 3 figures emerged from the darkness towards him. When Paco Rabanne saw them, only one thought came to mind: danger. Coming closer, one of the strangers asked the designer if he was Paco Rabanne. Unexpectedly for himself, the designer blurted out, "Stop taking me for this clown." Paco Rabanne was convinced that every person should learn to recognize and understand the warnings of fate. To do this, he recommended analyzing the turning points in your life. Remember how you felt at that moment, what people around you said, what coincidences occurred in your life. Paco Rabanne believed that if we do this work, we will discover that often some unexpected events prevented us from fulfilling our plans. They were the ones that led us to the plan that heaven had prepared for us. When we encounter many obstacles on the way to what we want, perhaps this is a warning for us that the fulfillment of our desires will not bring us the expected happiness. Heaven knows better what will benefit us and what will not. Of course, we have free will, but if we analyze all the warnings we received from fate, it turns out that it was this help that took into account all our true interests, pointing us to the right path. Follow the warnings of fate, and your life can become completely different. Our soul knows our fate, foresees all events, because it wrote them itself. What is written with a pen cannot be cut out with an axe. In the soul, all the events of the past and future are described as a whole. The sixth sense, or intuition, belongs to the soul and it is infallible, recommended Paco Rabanne.